that the differences that a bat became a flying mammal because it had a shrew-like ancestor, and that shrew-like ancestor had a genome spelled out in 3-letter codons. Those 3-letter codons specify amino acids, of which there are 20, and that the difference between the bat and the shrew is based in the differences in the proteins that are described by the genome. We are essentially saying that the difference between the bat and the shrew is a chemical difference. It's not a simple chemical difference the way it was when we were talking about excavators and sports cars, but nonetheless, it's a biochemical difference, right? The difference in the spelling of its proteins and structural proteins and enzymes and all of that stuff. I don't believe that mechanism is nearly powerful enough to explain how a shrew-like ancestor became a bat.
So what do you think is missing?
There's a whole layer that is missing that allows evolution to explore design space much more efficiently than the mechanism that we invoke.
And the mechanism we invoke is natural selection,
No.
adaptation,
The mechanism,
mutation.
That's the one.
Okay.
The mechanism that we invoke is
Random mutation.
random mutation, which I believe in. Random mutation happens. Selection, which chooses those variants that are produced by mutation and collects the ones that give the creature an advantage. There's nothing wrong with that story. That story is true. Okay? Random mutations happen, selection collects the ones that are good, and those collected advantageous mutations accumulate in the genome. All of that is true. What I'm arguing against is the idea that that transforms a shrew into a bat. What you need to get a shrew turned into a bat is a much less crude mechanism whereby selection, which is ancient at the point that you have shrews, explores design space looking for ways to be that are yet undiscovered more systematically than random chance.
And what would be that?
Well,
What is that force?
it's not a force.
What is that desire? What is that?
I believe there's a kind of information stored in genomes that is not in triplet codon form, that is much more of a type that would be familiar to a designer, either of machines or a programmer. That what we did was we took the random mutation model and we recognized that it was Darwinian, which it is, and we therefore assumed that it would explain anything that we could see that was clearly the product of Darwinian forces on the basis of those random mutations. And we skipped the layer in between in which selection has a different kind of information stored in the genome that is not triplet codon in nature. So
So there's an information stored in the genome that is motivating it to seek new forms?
no, not motivating, allowing it.
Allowing it.
Allowing.
So what's the motivation to seek new forms?
Oh, the motivation was there. It's primordial.
Right.
So the point is, let me try by analogy.
Okay.
Darwinists will tell you that evolution cannot look forward. It can only look backward. And there's a way in which that's just simply true. On the other hand, a Darwinist will also tell you that you are a product of evolution and you can look forward. Right?
Mm.
So if evolution can't look forward but it can build a creature that can, then can evolution look forward?
Mm.
I think it effectively can. So my point is that random mutation mechanism is in a race to produce new forms that are better adapted to the world than their ancestors. What if it can bias the game? It can enhance its own ability to search, right? If you lose your keys, you don't search randomly, right? You go through a systematic process of search, and that systematic process of search results in you finding your keys sooner than you would otherwise. So we should expect evolution to find every trick it can access to increase the rate at which it discovers forms that would be useful in the habitat in question.
Okay.
And this is simply that. I'm not really saying anything that extraordinary, right? If I say, do you know that computers, all they do is binary? Well, that's true. But if you then imagine that that means that the people who program computers do it in binary, well, there was a time when that was true. But it's not true anymore. It's not how you do it. There's a much more efficient way to program a computer, and it involves a programming language, which a computer itself can't understand. But you can build a computer that can either interpret the language in real time, or you can build a computer that can accept the code as it's spit out by a compiler. These are mechanisms to radically increase the effectiveness of a programmer. But it all comes out binary anyway, in the end. That's really what I'm arguing, is that there's the initial layer of Darwinian stuff, the random mutation layer that it looks like what we teach people. There's another layer, which we're not well familiar with, and it results in a much more powerful capacity to adapt than we can explain with that first mechanism, which is why guys like Tucker think there's just something. These Darwinists, they keep telling me that the shrew becomes a bat, and then they go on this rant about the random mutations and the triplet codons and the, mutations that actually turn out to be good. It's just not powerful enough, and they're not wrong. They're detecting something real. And frankly, Tucker is the layperson example of this. You've had Stephen Meyer on. He's a scientist who's quite good, and he's spotted that the mechanism in question isn't powerful enough to explain the phenomena that we swear it explains, and so he's catching up. But that's really on the Darwinists for not admitting what they can't yet explain and pursuing it, which is what they